5. Chilling secrets of Blackthorn Manor that will keep you awake. The village of Black Hollow had always been shrouded in mystery. Nestled in a valley and encircled by an ancient forest, it was a place forgotten by time. The locals whispered tales of strange occurrences, of disappearances, and the eerie silence that blanketed the woods after sundown. But no one spoke of the manor. The Blackthorn Manor stood at the edge of the forest, abandoned for decades. Its Gothic spires pierced the sky like jagged fangs, and its broken windows seemed to watch the village like empty, soulless eyes. They said the manor was cursed, a place where shadows whispered and the air itself seemed to breathe with malice. Ellie, a young journalist with a penchant for chasing mysteries, arrived in Black Hollow just as the sun dipped below the horizon. She had heard the rumors and read the stories, but she wasn't one to believe in curses or ghosts. What intrigued her most was the recent disappearance of a boy, Ethan, who was last seen near the edge of the forest 2 weeks ago. "Stay away from the manor," warned the innkeeper as Ellie checked in. His voice trembled, and his eyes darted to the window as if expecting to see something staring back. Nothing good comes from that place. But Ellie was undeterred. She planned to visit the manor the next day, determined to uncover the truth. That night she pored over old newspapers and scribbled notes in her journal, oblivious to the sound of the wind howling outside like a mournful wail. At precisely midnight, she was startled by a faint knock at her door. Heart racing, she opened it to find nothing but the cold, empty corridor. Yet as she turned back to her room, she noticed something peculiar, a single black feather lying on the floor. She picked it up, and an unexplainable chill ran down her spine. The next morning, Ellie set off toward the manor. The villagers' stares followed her as she crossed the town square, their faces etched with fear and pity. The path to the manor was overgrown, the forest closing in around her as if trying to swallow her whole. When she finally reached the gates, they creaked open with an unsettling ease, as though the manor had been expecting her. The air grew heavier with every step she took toward the massive double doors, which groaned ominously as she pushed them open. Inside, the manor was a decaying labyrinth of dark hallways and rotting wood. The air was damp, and the faint scent of mildew mixed with something metallic. Ellie shone her flashlight around, illuminating faded portraits of stern-faced figures whose eyes seemed to follow her. As she ventured deeper, she began to hear it, whispers. Faint, unintelligible, and chilling. She couldn't tell where they were coming from, but they seemed to surround her, growing louder with every step. Her flashlight flickered, and for a moment, she was plunged into darkness. When the light returned, she gasped. In the corner of the room stood a figure, cloaked in shadow. Its head tilted unnaturally, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. Before Ellie could react, it vanished, leaving behind only the faint echo of laughter, a sound that didn't belong to this world. Terrified but resolute, Ellie pressed on, drawn by a strange compulsion she couldn't explain. She found herself in a grand hall where an ornate mirror stood at the far end, its surface cracked and tarnished. As she approached, the whispers turned into a deafening roar. Her reflection appeared in the mirror, but something was wrong. The image didn't mimic her movements. Instead, it smiled, a wide, menacing grin that spread impossibly far. Ellie stumbled back, and the mirror began to tremble, cracks spreading across its surface until it shattered with a deafening crash. From the shards emerged a hand, skeletal and impossibly long, reaching toward her. Ellie screamed and turned to run, but the door slammed shut on its own, trapping her inside, and then a voice, deep, resonant, and filled with malice. "You came seeking the truth, little one. Now you belong to the shadows." Ellie's breath came in short gasps as she backed away from the skeletal hand reaching out of the shattered mirror. The voice still echoed in her ears, each word dripping with an otherworldly menace. She clutched her flashlight tightly, its beam trembling as much as her hands. The hand stopped mid-air, fingers curling slowly as if savoring her fear. Then it withdrew back into the darkness of the broken mirror. The whispers returned, softer now, but no less chilling, circling her like a sinister melody. "Who are you?" Ellie demanded, her voice trembling but firm. "What do you want?" The only response was the sound of footsteps echoing from somewhere deep within the manor. They were deliberate, slow, and growing closer. Ellie turned, searching for another way out, but the door she had entered through was gone. In its place was a solid wall of rotting wood. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to focus. She had come here for answers, and if the manor wasn't going to let her leave, then she would find them. She scanned the room, her flashlight catching glimpses of shattered glass, torn curtains, and faded wallpaper. Her eyes landed on a staircase at the far end of the hall, spiraling upward into the shadows. The footsteps were still approaching, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl. Ellie had no choice. She ran toward the staircase, the whispers growing louder as she ascended. The steps groaned under her weight, each one threatening to collapse. The growl below turned into a roar, and Ellie dared not look back. She reached the top and found herself in a long corridor lined with doors. Each door was slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of darkness within. One door at the end of the corridor stood out. Unlike the others, it was pristine, its wood polished and unblemished. A golden handle gleamed in the dim light. Drawn to it, Ellie approached cautiously. As she reached for the handle, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. She opened the door to find a small room, empty except for a single object in the center, a music box. It was ornate, covered in intricate carvings of figures dancing in a forest. Ellie's hands shook as she reached out and turned the small crank. The music that played was hauntingly beautiful, a melody that seemed to pull at her very soul. As the music played, the shadows in the room began to move, coalescing into a shape. The figure from before reappeared, its yellow eyes glowing brighter. This time it spoke, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "You seek the truth, but the truth will cost you. Are you willing to pay the price?" Ellie swallowed hard, her mind racing. She thought of Ethan, of the villagers, of the countless unanswered questions. She nodded slowly. "Very well," the figure said. The music box stopped, and the room plunged into darkness. Ellie felt a cold hand grasp her shoulder, and then she was falling, tumbling into a void where the whispers became screams. Ellie's fall seemed endless, her screams swallowed by the oppressive darkness. When she finally landed, it was with a bone-jarring thud on a cold stone floor. She groaned, her flashlight skittering out of her grasp and flickering weakly. As she reached for it, a faint light began to illuminate the space. She was in a vast underground chamber, its walls carved with strange symbols that pulsed faintly as though alive. The air was heavy, laced with a metallic tang that made her stomach churn. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, and on it lay a tattered book bound in what looked like aged leather. The whispers returned, this time louder and more distinct, emanating from the book. Ellie approached cautiously, the words growing clearer with each step. They weren't in any language she recognized, yet she understood them. They spoke of an ancient pact, of a power bound within the manor that demanded a vessel to awaken. "You are the chosen," the voice from earlier boomed, resonating through the chamber. The shadowy figure materialized once more, now towering over Ellie. Its form was more defined, almost human, but its eyes still burned with that unnatural yellow glow. The boy was not enough. You, however, possess the will to uncover the truth. That makes you worthy. Ellie's mind raced. The whispers, the visions, the compulsion to enter the manor, it had all been orchestrated to lead her here. But for what purpose? "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The figure gestured toward the book. "Read, accept the truth, and become one with the shadows." Ellie hesitated. The whispers grew insistent, urging her to comply. She glanced at the book, its pages seeming to ripple as though alive. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber was sealed, and the shadows pressed closer, their chills seeping into her skin. Summoning her courage, Ellie reached out and opened the book. The moment her fingers touched the pages, a surge of energy shot through her, and the symbols on the walls flared brightly. Images flooded her mind, visions of the manor's past, of rituals performed in the chamber, of sacrifices made to appease an ancient entity that dwelled within the shadows. Ellie's scream echoed through the chamber as the energy consumed her. The shadowy figure watched, its expression inscrutable. When the light finally dimmed, Ellie was no longer the same. Her eyes glowed faintly yellow, and the whispers had fallen silent. The figure knelt before her. "Welcome, Keeper of Shadows. Your reign begins." Ellie stood in stunned silence, her body trembling as the weight of her new reality settled over her. The whispers were gone, but something far more profound had taken their place, a steady pulse, like a heartbeat, reverberating through her very being. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive within her, binding her to the manor and its secrets. Her mind raced with fragments of the visions she had seen, the villagers offering sacrifices, the manor's transformation into a beacon of dark power, and the entity that had orchestrated it all. She had become a part of its story now, an unwilling participant in a cycle that had endured for centuries. "What have you done to me?" Ellie demanded, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You accepted the truth," the shadowy figure replied, rising to its full height. "And now, you are bound to it. The Keeper's role is to maintain the balance, to ensure the shadows remain contained, yet powerful." Ellie's hands curled into fists. "I didn't ask for this." The figure tilted its head, a faint trace of amusement flickering in its glowing eyes. "No one does. Yet here you are." Before Ellie could respond, the ground beneath her began to tremble. The walls of the chamber seemed to ripple, the symbols glowing brighter. The air grew thick, and Ellie felt an immense force pulling her toward the altar. "What's happening?" she shouted, struggling against the unseen force. "The pact is complete," the figure said calmly. "The shadows awaken fully now, and with them, so do you. The manor has chosen its vessel." The force intensified, and Ellie found herself lifted off the ground. Darkness enveloped her, but instead of fear, she felt a strange calm. Memories that weren't her own flooded her mind, centuries of history, of keepers who had come before her, of the sacrifices they had made and the power they had wielded. When the darkness receded, Ellie was standing in the grand hall of the manor once more. But it was different now. The decay was gone, replaced by opulence. The chandeliers sparkled, the floors gleamed, and the walls were adorned with vibrant tapestries. The manor had been restored, its true power awakened. Ellie looked down at her hands, now steady and sure. The faint glow in her eyes reflected back at her from a polished mirror on the wall. She felt stronger, more confident, but also burdened by the immense responsibility that had been thrust upon her. "You are the bridge between worlds," the shadowy figure said, appearing beside her. Its form was now less menacing, almost humanoid. "The villagers will come to you. They will fear you, but they will also need you. Use the shadows wisely." Ellie turned to face the figure, her resolve hardening. "And what if I don't want this? What if I refuse?" The figure's smile was cold. "You can try, but the manor does not release its keeper willingly." As if in response, the shadows in the room shifted, encircling Ellie like a protective cloak. She could feel their power, their hunger, and their loyalty. She was no longer just Ellie, the journalist seeking answers. She was the keeper of shadows, bound to the manor and its dark legacy. And deep down she knew she could never escape. Ellie spent days, perhaps weeks, trapped within the manor, though time itself seemed distorted. The shadows that surrounded her moved with an eerie intelligence, responding to her thoughts and emotions. At first they terrified her, but slowly she began to understand them. They were not just manifestations of darkness, but fragments of something older and far more complex. Her nights were restless, haunted by visions of the manor's history. She saw glimpses of the previous keepers, each one drawn into the manor's clutches by their own desires for power, knowledge, or salvation. Some wielded the shadows with grace, bending them to protect the village from supernatural threats. Others succumbed to greed and allowed the darkness to consume them, turning the manor into a source of terror. Ellie refused to let herself fall into either trap. She resolved to find a way to balance the power she now held without letting it corrupt her. One evening, as the moonlight filtered through the restored stained glass windows, she decided to venture deeper into the manor's labyrinthine halls. She was drawn to the library, a massive room she had glimpsed during her initial exploration. When she arrived, the sight stole her breath. The library was a towering expanse of shelves that stretched impossibly high, filled with books bound in leather, cloth, and even materials she couldn't identify. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and wax. At the center of the room was a desk, and on it lay a single book that seemed to glow faintly, its pages fluttering as if moved by an invisible wind. Ellie hesitated before approaching the book. The whispers, which had been silent for days, returned in a hushed chorus. Unlike before, they no longer sounded hostile. Instead, they seemed curious. She opened the book, its pages revealing intricate illustrations of rituals, ancient languages, and symbols that pulsed faintly with energy. The words seemed to rearrange themselves into English as she focused on them. The book told the story of the manor's origin. Centuries ago, a sorcerer had built the manor atop a nexus of shadow energy, intending to harness its power to protect the valley from invaders. But the power proved too great, corrupting the sorcerer and turning the manor into a prison for the shadows. The keepers were chosen by the manor itself, bound to maintain the balance and prevent the shadows from escaping into the world. Ellie's fingers traced the pages, her heart pounding. The book hinted at a way to break the cycle, a ritual that could sever the connection between the manor and its keeper. But the ritual required a sacrifice of immense personal significance, something tied to the keeper's soul. Before Ellie could dwell on the implications, the shadows around her stirred violently. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the library, and she spun around to see a massive, hulking figure emerging from the darkness. Its form was a grotesque amalgamation of human and beast, with eyes that burned brighter than any she had seen before.
"The balance is fragile," it growled, its voice reverberating through the room. "The keeper must prove their worth." Ellie instinctively reached out, and the shadows responded, swirling around her arms like armor. Her heart raced, but she held her ground. "What do you want from me?" she demanded. The creature lunged, and Ellie felt the shadows surge through her, forming a barrier that absorbed the impact. She fought back, the shadows moving like extensions of her own will. The battle was a test of her resolve, her connection to the manor, and her ability to wield the power she had inherited. As the struggle reached its peak, Ellie realized something. The shadows weren't just tools, they were a part of her now. They responded to her emotions, her intentions, and her choices. With a deep breath, she focused her will, and the shadows enveloped the creature, subduing it without destroying it. The library fell silent as the creature dissolved into the air, leaving behind a faint shimmer of light. Ellie collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The book on the desk closed itself, its glow intensifying for a moment before fading. Ellie stared at it, the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her. The path to breaking the cycle was clear, but the cost was steep. For now, she remained the keeper of shadows, and the fate of Black Hollow rested in her hands.